Today we're going to be looking at how to convert fractions to decimals. But in order to do this, I want to start up front and just tell you there's a couple that you need to memorize. You should have these committed to memory by the end of the week. When we're talking about these two fractions, 1/3, I want you to memorize that this is 0.3 repeating. So it's that 3 with that line above it, like what we have talked about before, which means that it goes on and on and on forever and never stops. So first one you're going to memorize is 1/3 is 0.3 repeating. If I was you, I would be writing that information in my journal at the top of the page. 1/3 is 0.3 repeating. The other fraction that you need to memorize is 2/3, which is 6 repeating. So you should have both of these written on that top line in your journal before we even get started. Maybe even make yourself a little note that these need to be memorized. It's the easiest way. On today's assignment, if you have any fractions that are repeating, which hint, hint, you'll have one of these, you'll need to take it to 2 decimal places, which means you'll type into the computer either 0.33 or 0.66. But that is only for today's assignment. Other days you may have different assignments in different directions. So let's look here at this first example. We've got 2/5 and we need to convert it into a decimal. And all that means is we're going to write it as a decimal that has the same value. A fraction is just another way to write a division problem. We read our division problem from the top to the bottom. So this is saying 2 divided by 5. So when I set that up in my division bracket, it becomes 2 divided by 5. Now you should have already worked with this information before, so this really should be a review for you. 2 being divided by 5, 2 is smaller, so what we have to do is we have to add our decimal and a 0, and then we bring that decimal point up. So now we look at it as 20 divided by 5. 20 divided by 5 is 4. 4 times 5 is 20. We subtract and we get 0. So this tells us that 2/5 is equal to 4/10. This would be our final answer. Sometimes you're going to have a mixed number, like 3 and 7/8. So for the time being, I'm just going to ignore the 3 and I'm going to look only at the fraction. And I read it from the top to the bottom as a division problem. 7 divided by 8. 7 divided by 8. Add my decimal point and a 0. And then I've got to bring that decimal point up. So now I have 70 divided by 8, which will be 8. 8 times 8 is 64. Subtract and we get 6. Well, I still have a number here. I subtracted, I have a number, so I have to keep going. With decimals, you keep going until you have nothing left over, no remainder. So I'm going to add a 0 and bring it down. 60 divided by 8 is 7. 7 times 8 is 56. Subtract and we have 4. Add a 0 and bring it down. 40 divided by 8 is 5. 5 times 8 is 40. Subtract and we have 0. So this is my decimal, 0.875. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write my 0.875 here. So 3 and 7/8 is equal to this 0.875. And then I am going to simply put my whole number 3 where it belongs, which is right here in front of my decimal point. So when you look at it like this, you can say 3 and 7/8 is equal to 3 and 875 thousandths. Okay? Let's look at another one. 3 divided by 20. Read it as a division problem from top to bottom. So 3 divided by 20, which is 3 divided by 20. Add our decimal point and a 0. Bring it up. 30 divided by 20 is 1. 1 times 20 is 20. Subtract and we get 10. We have a remainder, so I'm going to add a 0 and I'm going to bring it down. 100 divided by 20 is 5. 5 times 20 is 100. Subtract and we have 0, so we know we are done. We are at the end of this problem. So now I'm going to write my answer. 3/20 is equal to 1500ths. Last one, 3 3/4. This may be one that you have memorized. I love when kids have their fraction to decimal conversions memorized. So for this one, if you have it memorized, I'm perfectly fine with you writing it as 3.75 and moving on. However, if you don't have it memorized, we're going to read our fraction from top to bottom. So it's 3 divided by 4. So when I set that up, it is 3 divided by 4. Add my decimal and my 0. So 4 goes into 37 times. 7 times 4 is 28. Subtract and we have 2. Add a 0 and bring it down. 20 divided by 4 is 5. 5 times 4 is 20. We have no remainder, so we still get 0.75. And remember our whole number, we just write it right in front of the decimal, and we have our 3.75.